The galaxy was old, older than most species could understand, and for 300,000 years, the Conclave of 12 had ruled it with careful hands. They were not cruel rulers. They did not burn worlds or enslave populations. They simply guided. They watched young species crawl out of their oceans and learn to make fire. They waited as these species built cities and dreamed of the stars, and when the time was right, they made contact. It was always the same. A young species would send signals into the void, hoping someone would answer. The Conclave would answer. They would come with gifts and promises. They would offer technology and knowledge. And slowly, gently, they would bring the new species into their fold. No one ever said no. How could they? The Conclave had done this 1,000 times. They knew exactly what to say and what to offer. They knew how to make joining seem like the only reasonable choice. Ambassador Yethrani of the Veloci had performed this duty many times. Her body was made of living crystal that shifted colors with her mood. She was 6,000 years old and had welcomed 47 species into the Conclave. She was very good at her job. When the deep space sensors detected radio signals from a small yellow star, she was chosen to lead the delegation. The star was called Sol by its inhabitants. The third planet was called Earth. The species called themselves humans. The reports said they were young, barely 10,000 years of civilization. They had only just begun reaching into space. Their technology was primitive. Their planet was divided into many nations that often fought each other. Perfect candidates for guidance, Yethrani assembled her fleet. 12 ships, all of them beautiful and elegant. None of them carried weapons. The Conclave did not need weapons when meeting young species. The young ones were always too amazed and too grateful to cause trouble. The fleet traveled to Sol and positioned itself at the edge of the system. Yethrani ordered her crew to broadcast the universal greeting. It was a mathematical sequence that any intelligent species could understand. It said, in the language of numbers, "We are here, we are peaceful, we wish to talk." The greeting traveled at the speed of light toward the blue planet. Yethrani waited with patience born of centuries. She expected the humans to panic at first. Then they would be curious. Then they would be eager. It was always the same pattern. What she did not know was that humanity had been listening for a very long time. Far beneath the surface of Earth, in chambers that did not appear on any map, men and women sat before screens that showed the Veloci fleet. They had detected the ships days ago. They had been tracking them since they entered the solar system. General Marcus Stone watched the universal greeting appear on his display. He understood it perfectly. Humanity had cracked that code decades ago, along with many others. "They're here," he said quietly. The room was filled with people from every nation on Earth. 20 years ago, they had been enemies. Now they worked together in perfect silence. They had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. On the wall behind them hung photographs, thousands of photographs. They showed alien faces, alien cities, alien worlds. They were not from the Conclave's official records. They were from intercepted transmissions, distress calls, final messages. The Dreth had sent a warning before they disappeared. The Silicari had broadcast their history in their last moments. A dozen other species had tried to tell the galaxy what the Conclave truly was. The Conclave was not a community. It was a machine. It took young species and shaped them. It controlled what they learned and how fast they grew. Those who accepted this control were allowed to live. Those who did not were quietly erased from history. Humanity had found the truth hidden in the noise between stars, and humanity had made a choice. Stone picked up a phone and dialed a number that connected to a hollowed-out asteroid called Ceres. On the other end, Admiral Elena Vasquez answered. "They've arrived," Stone told her. 12 ships, no weapon signatures. They think we're children." Vasquez smiled. It was not a kind smile. Then let's show them what the children have been building. In secret shipyards across the solar system, lights began to turn on. Engines that had waited for years began to warm up. Crews who had trained in silence took their positions. Above them all, the Veloci fleet waited for humanity's response. Yethrani practiced her welcoming speech. She had given it so many times that the words felt like old friends. She would tell the humans about the wonders of the galaxy. She would offer them medicine and science. She would promise them a place among the stars. She did not know that beneath her feet, hidden in the shadows of moons and the dust of asteroid fields, 200 warships were waking up. She did not know that at the heart of Ceres, a ship 3 kilometers long was powering its engines for the first time. A ship covered in weapons that should not exist. A ship built by people who knew the truth about the galaxy. The humans had heard the Conclave's greeting. Now they were preparing their answer. And it was not the answer anyone expected. Admiral Elena Vasquez had never seen the sun rise over Earth. She was born in space, in the hidden shipyards of humanity's secret fleet. Her mother had been an engineer. Her father had been a soldier. Both had died building the ship she now commanded. The ship was called Prometheus. It was 3 kilometers long. Its hull was made of metals that did not exist in any scientific database. Its weapons were based on technology found buried in the cold darkness beyond Pluto. No one knew who had left that technology there, but someone had wanted humanity to find it. Vasquez stood on the bridge and watched her displays. The Veloci fleet hung in space like jewels against black velvet. They were beautiful ships, elegant and graceful. They looked like they had been designed by artists, not engineers. The Prometheus looked like it had been designed by people who expected to fight for their lives, because it had. "All ships report ready," her second officer said. His name was Commander James Okonkwo. His grandmother had been one of the first to decode the alien warning signals. His whole family had dedicated their lives to this moment. "Signal the fleet," Vasquez said. "It's time." Across the solar system, ships began to move. They rose from craters on the moon. They emerged from the rings of Saturn. They powered out of the asteroid belt in formations that human pilots had practiced for 20 years. 200 warships, every single one built in secret. Every single one crewed by volunteers who knew they might never see their homes again. The Veloci sensors detected them almost immediately. On the bridge of her flagship, Ambassador Yethrani felt her crystal body flicker with confusion. Her officers were shouting numbers at her, ship counts, weapon signatures, energy readings that made no sense. "That's impossible," she said. Her voice was calm, but her colors were shifting rapidly. "They're primitive. The reports said they were primitive." "Ambassador," her tactical officer said, "those ships are carrying weapons, heavy weapons. Some of them match energy signatures we haven't seen since—" He stopped. He didn't want to finish the sentence. "Since when?" Yethrani demanded. "Since the Founders' War, before the Conclave was formed." Yethrani turned back to her screen. The human fleet was moving toward her in perfect formation. At their head was a ship larger than anything the Conclave had built in 100,000 years. It was ugly and brutal and covered in weapons that seemed to drink in the light around them. She opened a communication channel. Her training told her to remain calm. Her experience told her that everything would be fine. Young species did not challenge the Conclave. It simply did not happen. "Unknown vessels," she said. "I am Ambassador Yethrani of the Conclave of 12. We come in peace. There is no need for weapons. We wish only to talk." The response came immediately. A human woman's face appeared on her screen. She had dark hair and dark eyes, and a face that showed no fear at all. "Ambassador," the woman said, "I am Admiral Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Fleet. We know who you are. We know what the Conclave does, and we are not interested in your version of peace." Yethrani felt her colors shift to pale blue. It was the shade of deep worry. You misunderstand our intentions. The Conclave has guided 1,000 species toward prosperity. We can offer you technology, medicine, knowledge beyond your dreams. You can offer us a cage, Vasquez replied. A comfortable cage, yes, but still a cage. We've heard the transmissions you tried to erase. The Dreth, the Silicari, the Hollow Men of Kepler 442. We know what happens to species that don't follow your rules. The bridge of the Veloci flagship fell silent. Yetharani's officers stared at her with expressions of shock. No one was supposed to know about those species. Their records had been erased. Their warnings had been silenced, or so the Conclave had believed. How? Yethrani whispered. You've been sending signals across the galaxy for 300,000 years, Vasquez said. You never thought to check if anyone was listening who wasn't supposed to. The human fleet continued its approach. The great Dreadnought at their center was now close enough that Yetharani could see details on its hull. She saw weapon ports, dozens of them, hundreds of them, each one large enough to destroy a small moon. We don't want war, Vasquez continued. We never wanted war. But we will not kneel. We will not be guided. We will not be controlled. She leaned forward. Go back to your conclave, Ambassador. Tell them that Earth is not joining their community. Tell them that we will defend ourselves against anyone who tries to force us. And if they send fleets? Yethrani asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. Then we will meet those fleets. Vasquez's eyes were hard as stone. And we will teach the galaxy something it has forgotten. Something the Conclave worked very hard to make everyone forget. What is that? The Dreadnought's main weapon began to glow. It was a light that seemed wrong somehow. A light that pulled at the eyes and made the stars around it dim. That freedom is worth fighting for, Vasquez said, no matter the cost. The communication channel closed. Yethrani stood alone on her bridge, surrounded by frightened officers, staring at a fleet that should not exist. For the first time in her 6,000 years, she did not know what to do next. The two fleets faced each other across the void. On one side, the elegant ships of the Veloci delegation. On the other, the brutal warships of humanity's secret armada. Between them hung a silence that seemed to stretch across the entire galaxy. Ambassador Yethrani stood perfectly still on her bridge. Her crystal body had stopped shifting colors. It was now a single shade of deep gray. Her officers recognized this. It was the color of a Veloci who had run out of options. Ambassador, her communications officer said quietly, the Conclave is requesting a status report. They want to know why we haven't begun the welcoming ceremony. Yethrani almost laughed. The welcoming ceremony. The carefully designed ritual that made young species feel honored and grateful. The words and gestures that had brought 1,000 civilizations into the Conclave's embrace. None of it mattered now. The humans knew everything. They had prepared for everything. Tell the Conclave, she said slowly, that the situation has changed. Tell them that Protocol 7 has failed. Tell them, she paused, tell them that we may have made a terrible mistake. Across the gap between fleets, Admiral Vasquez watched the Veloci ships. They had not moved since her warning. They had not powered weapons or raised shields. They simply waited, like animals caught in headlights. They're scared, Commander Okonkwo observed. They should be. Vasquez's voice was flat. They've spent 300,000 years believing no one would ever challenge them. Now they're learning how wrong they were. Do you think they'll attack? No. Their ships aren't built for combat. They're built to impress, to awe, to make young species feel small. Vasquez allowed herself a small smile. They never expected to meet someone who wasn't impressed. On her display, a new signal appeared. Yethrani was requesting another conversation. Vasquez nodded to her communications officer. The ambassador's face appeared on screen. She looked different now. The calm confidence was gone. In its place was something Vasquez recognized. It was the look of someone whose entire world had just fallen apart. "Admiral," Yethrani said, "I must ask you something. You say you've heard transmissions from species the Conclave has dealt with. What exactly did these transmissions tell you?" Vasquez considered the question. She could refuse to answer. She could use this moment to frighten the ambassador even more, but she had not built this fleet to cause fear. She had built it to end fear. "The Dreth sent a warning," she said. "They discovered that the technology the Conclave gives to young species is designed to be limited. It allows growth, but only to a certain point. Any species that develops beyond that limit is considered a threat." Yethrani's colors flickered. She did not deny it. "The Silicari found something worse," Vasquez continued. "They learned that the Conclave's founding species didn't create this system to help others. They created it to protect themselves, to make sure no one would ever grow strong enough to challenge them." "That was long ago," Yethrani said weakly. "The Conclave has changed. We no longer—" "The hollow men of Kepler 442 were erased from existence 50,000 years ago," Vasquez interrupted. "Their crime was developing faster than light travel on their own, without Conclave approval. That doesn't sound like change to me." The silence returned. It filled the space between them like a physical weight. Yethrani's voice was barely a whisper when she spoke again. "What do you want?" "We want to be left alone." Vasquez leaned forward. "We want the Conclave to acknowledge that humanity is not part of their system. We will develop our own technology at our own pace. We will explore the galaxy on our own terms. And if any species wants to leave the Conclave and join us, we will welcome them. The Conclave will never agree to that. Then we will make them agree." Vasquez gestured at the fleet behind her. "Every ship you see was built in 40 years. Every weapon was designed by people who knew they were fighting for survival. If the Conclave sends a fleet against us, we will defeat it. If they send 2 fleets, we will build more ships. If they send 100 fleets—" She smiled coldly. "Then the galaxy will learn that humanity does not surrender. Ever." Yethrani stared at her for a long moment. In her 6,000 years, she had negotiated with hundreds of species. She had seen ambition and fear and greed and hope. But she had never seen anything like what she saw in this human's eyes. It was certainty. Absolute, unshakable certainty. This woman believed every word she said. She believed that her small species could stand against the oldest power in the galaxy. And somehow, looking at the fleet behind her, Yethrani was not sure she was wrong. "I will deliver your message," the ambassador said finally. "But I must warn you. The Conclave has never faced a challenge like this. They will not know how to respond. And when beings of great power do not know what to do, they often choose violence." "We're counting on it," Vasquez replied. "Because when they choose violence, the whole galaxy will see what happens next. And then every species they've controlled for 300,000 years will start asking questions." She ended the transmission. In the silence that followed, Commander Okonkwo let out a long breath. "Do you think she'll convince them to back down?" Vasquez shook her head. "No. But she'll make them think. And right now, thinking is the most dangerous thing the Conclave can do." The 2 fleets remained in position, watching each other across the darkness. And somewhere far away, in the halls of ancient power, the message began to spread. The humans were not afraid, and that terrified everyone. The Chamber of Concordance was the oldest structure in the galaxy. It had been built before most stars had names. Its walls were made of metal that no longer existed anywhere else. Its lights never flickered. Its air was always perfect. For 300,000 years, the Conclave of 12 had met here to decide the fate of civilizations. They had never met in emergency session. There had never been a need. The galaxy was peaceful because the conclave kept it peaceful. Problems were solved before they became problems. Threats were eliminated before they became threats. Until now. 12 beings sat around a table that was older than some planets. They represented 12 species that had ruled together since the beginning of recorded history. They were ancient and powerful, and absolutely certain of their place in the universe. Ambassador Yethrani stood before them. Her crystal body was dim. She had not slept since leaving Sol. She had not eaten. She had simply sat in her quarters and tried to understand what had happened. "Tell us again," said High Arbiter Morveth of the Kryn. He was the oldest being in the room. His body was a mass of tentacles that constantly moved and shifted. His voice was like stones grinding together. "Tell us exactly what the humans said." Yethrani repeated the conversation. She left nothing out. When she finished, the chamber was silent. "This is absurd," said Delegate Vor of the Ashkani. He was made of living metal and fire. When he spoke, sparks flew from his mouth. "A species that barely reached their own moon 50 years ago cannot threaten the conclave. Send the combined fleet. Destroy them. Problem solved." "The problem," said a quiet voice, "is that they might destroy the combined fleet." Everyone turned to look at Observer Keth. He was the military analyst of the conclave. His body was covered in eyes that saw in every spectrum. He had not spoken in 1,000 years. Most of the younger delegates had never heard his voice. "Explain," Morveth commanded. Keth activated a display in the center of the table. Images appeared: ships, weapons, energy readings. "The human Dreadnought carries weapons that match signatures from the Founders' War," he said. "Weapons that we buried, weapons that we never wanted anyone to find." His eyes blinked in sequence. "They found them. They understood them. They improved them." "How is that possible?" demanded Lady Cirrus of the Veleth. Her body was made of shadow and whispers. "The caches were hidden outside their system. They shouldn't have been able to reach them for another 1,000 years." "They reached them," Keth replied simply. "We do not know how. We do not know when. But they have technology that rivals our own, perhaps exceeds it." The silence that followed was different from before. It was the silence of beings who were starting to feel something they had never felt. Fear. "There must be a mistake," Vor insisted. "No young species develops this quickly. It violates every model we have." "Perhaps our models are wrong," Yethrani said quietly. Every eye in the chamber turned to her. "In 6,000 years of diplomatic service," she continued, "I have never met a species like this. They are not impressed by us. They are not afraid of us. They have been watching us for decades, listening to our signals, learning our secrets, and they have been preparing." "Preparing for what?" Morveth asked. "For this moment, for the day we would come to their door with gifts and promises. They knew what those gifts really meant. They knew what happens to species that accept them." Yethrani's colors shifted to deep purple. "They decided they would rather die than become what we wanted them to be." The conclave members exchanged glances. This was not how young species were supposed to behave. Young species were supposed to be grateful. They were supposed to see the conclave as benefactors, not enemies. "What do they want?" Lady Cirrus asked. "They want to be left alone. They want to develop without our guidance. And they want—" Yethrani paused. This was the part that frightened her most. "They want to offer the same choice to every species in the conclave." The reaction was immediate. Voices rose in anger and disbelief. Vor slammed his fist on the table, leaving a glowing mark in the ancient metal. Lady Cirrus's shadows darkened the entire corner of the room. "They want to destroy us," Vor shouted. "They want to tear apart everything we've built." "No," Keth said. His quiet voice somehow cut through the noise. "They want to offer a choice. They want to let species decide for themselves whether to stay or go." His eyes focused on Morveth. "When was the last time we gave anyone that choice?" No one answered. High Arbiter Morveth was quiet for a long time. He was thinking about things he had not thought about in millennia. The founding of the Conclave, the wars that came before, the decision to create a system where no one would ever be strong enough to challenge them again. It had seemed so wise at the time, so necessary. But now, looking at the images of human warships on the display, he wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. "What do you recommend?" he finally asked Keth. The observer was silent for a moment. "I recommend we do something we have never done before. I recommend we negotiate. Truly negotiate. Not the theater we perform for young species, but real discussion between equals." "Equals?" Vor sounded disgusted. "They are children." "Children with weapons that can destroy us," Keth replied. "Children who found our secrets and turned them against us. Children who are not afraid to die for their freedom." He paused. "Those are not children, Delegate. Those are something else entirely." The debate continued for hours, but in the end, the decision was made. A diplomatic mission would be sent to Earth. A real diplomatic mission, with real authority to negotiate. The Conclave had never surrendered, but for the first time in 300,000 years, they were willing to talk, and somewhere in the void, humanity waited for their answer. 1 year had passed since the day humanity answered the Conclave's greeting with a Dreadnought. In that year, the galaxy had changed more than it had in the previous 100,000. News of the confrontation had spread despite the Conclave's efforts to contain it. Species that had been quiet for millennia began to ask questions. Old records were examined. Hidden transmissions were found. The truth could not be buried any longer. Admiral Vasquez stood on the observation deck of a new space station. It floated at the exact midpoint between Sol and the Conclave's capital world. It was the first truly neutral territory in the galaxy's history. Neither side controlled it. Neither side owned it. It was called Haven, and it was where the future would be decided. The negotiations had been long and difficult. The Conclave had spent 300,000 years believing they were right. It was not easy for them to admit they might have been wrong. There were factions that still wanted war. There were voices that called for humanity's destruction. But there were other voices, too. Younger members of the Conclave who had begun to question the old ways. Species that had grown tired of being controlled. Leaders who saw that the old order was cracking and wanted to be on the right side of history. Ambassador General David Chen had led humanity's diplomatic team. He was a patient man. He had spent his whole life preparing for this moment. He understood that changing a galaxy took time. "The first treaty is signed," he said, stepping onto the observation deck beside Vasquez. "The Conclave has agreed to recognize Earth as an independent power. No guidance, no oversight, full sovereignty." Vasquez nodded. It was what they had fought for, what they had built their fleet for. What generations of humans had sacrificed everything for, but it was only the beginning. "And the others?" she asked. Chen smiled. "That's where it gets interesting." Across the galaxy, the news of the treaty spread. For the first time in recorded history, the Conclave had acknowledged a species as an equal without first controlling their development. They had admitted that their way was not the only way. It was a small crack in the wall, but small cracks have a way of growing. The Dreth were the first to emerge. They had been hiding in the galactic core for 50,000 years, ever since the Conclave had tried to erase them. They had survived by staying silent, staying hidden, watching and waiting. Now they sent a message to Earth. It was short. It simply said, "We remember. We are ready." Then came the Silicari. They had scattered across 1,000 worlds, pretending to be less than they were. Now they revealed themselves. Their ships appeared in systems all across the galaxy, flying colors that had not been seen in millennia. Others followed. Species that had been controlled for so long they had forgotten what freedom felt like. Species that had been told they were too young, too primitive, too dangerous to be trusted with their own destiny. Species that had believed the Conclave's lies because they had never heard anything else. Now they heard something different. They heard that a young species from a small planet had refused to kneel. They heard that freedom was possible. And they began to hope. On Haven Station, representatives from dozens of species gathered for the first meeting of what would become the Free Worlds Alliance. It was a simple organization at first, just a promise to trade honestly and defend each other if threatened. But it was something the galaxy had never seen before. It was a choice. Vasquez watched the delegations arrive. There were beings of crystal and fire and shadow. There were creatures that breathed different atmospheres and saw different colors. There were minds so alien she could barely understand them. But they all had one thing in common. They had all chosen to be here. No one had forced them. No one had guided them. They had looked at the galaxy and decided they wanted something different. "It's not what I expected," she said quietly. Chen stood beside her, watching the same scene. "What did you expect?" "War. Destruction. The Conclave sending fleet after fleet until one of us was destroyed." She shook her head. "I spent my whole life preparing to fight. I never really thought about what would happen if we won." "We haven't won yet," Chen reminded her. "The Conclave still has enormous power. There are factions that will never accept what we're building here. There will be conflicts, maybe even wars." "I know." Vasquez turned to face him. "But look at them. Look at all these species who were told they could never be free. Look at what they're building together." She smiled. It was the first real smile she had allowed herself in years. "We gave them something the Conclave never could. We gave them a choice." Below them, the delegations were taking their seats. The first session of the Free Worlds Alliance was about to begin. History was being written in real time. Vasquez thought about her parents who had died building the Prometheus. She thought about the generations of humans who had lived in secret, building ships they hoped would never have to fight. She thought about all the species who had sent warnings into the void, hoping someone would hear them. Someone had heard. And now the galaxy would never be the same. The Conclave still existed. It still held power over hundreds of worlds. But it was no longer the only option. For the first time in 300,000 years, beings across the galaxy could look at the stars and see possibility instead of control. Humanity had come to the stars expecting to fight for survival. What they had started instead was something far more powerful, a revolution of hope. And it was only the beginning.